Sometimes a man just wants a quiet place to call his own, away from the noise of the world. But the past has a way of finding you, even in the loneliest corners of the mountains. Silas Gentry found a burned cabin in the Bitterroot Range that folks said was cursed. He didn't believe in curses. He just needed shelter before winter. While clearing ash from the old stone fireplace, his shovel hit metal. A rusted tin box hidden for years. Inside were letters from a desperate woman and a marshal's badge turned black by fire. The letters told of stolen gold and a lawman who disappeared. Someone had tried to burn the truth away. What secret was worth hiding in flames? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silas Gentry had been a man of purpose once. 20 years as an army scout, tracking hostiles through country so rough it would break a younger man's spirit. He knew how to read the land, how to move through timber without snapping a twig, how to find water where there seemed to be none. Those skills had kept him alive through campaigns that killed better men. But skills don't keep you warm at night when the person who mattered most is gone. His wife, Margaret, had died 3 years back. Fever took her in the span of a week, and Silas had been 200 miles away on a contract job, guiding a survey crew through the Bitterroot Range. By the time he made it home to their small house outside Fort Benton, she was already in the ground. The neighbors had done their best, but it wasn't the same as being there to hold her hand, to tell her one last time that she'd been the best part of his life. After that, the house felt wrong. Every corner held a memory that cut like a knife. The kitchen where she'd sung while making breakfast. The porch where they'd watched sunsets together. The bedroom where he'd wake, reaching for her and find only emptiness. So he sold it all, packed what mattered into saddlebags, left the rest for whoever wanted it, and headed into the high country. The Bitterroot Range in late autumn of 1878 was a place of wild beauty and harsh truth. Snow already dusted the highest peaks, and the aspens had turned to gold against the dark green of the pines. Elk were moving down from the high meadows, and the creeks ran cold and clear. Silas had been working his way south, following the game trails, setting traps for beaver and marten, living off venison and whatever else the land provided. It was a solitary life, but that suited him fine. He had his mule, Moses, for company, and Moses was a better conversationalist than most men Silas had known. Moses was 20 years old if he was a day, grey around the muzzle, stubborn as January ice, and loyal in the way only a good mule can be. Silas talked to him regular, and Moses would flick his long ears as if he understood every word. Maybe he did. Animals had a way of sensing things people missed. They'd been tracking a bull elk for 2 days when Silas found the cabin, or what was left of it. The elk had led them up a narrow valley, thick with lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, to a clearing where a spring bubbled up from the rocks. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing, or rather, the blackened skeleton of a cabin sat there. The roof had collapsed inward, the walls were mostly gone, but the stone fireplace and chimney still stood, rising from the ruins like a monument to whoever had lived there. Silas dismounted and walked the perimeter slowly. The fire had been years ago, that much was clear. Saplings grew up through what had been the floor. Moss covered the foundation stones, but the location was perfect. The spring meant fresh water year-round. The clearing got good sun. The valley provided shelter from the worst winds. And the stone fireplace, though scorched and weathered, was still solid. He'd been looking for a place to winter over. The high country was fine in summer, but come December, a man needed 4 walls and a roof. This could work. It would take effort, considerable effort, but Silas had time and a strong back. He had timber all around him and the knowledge to use it. Moses snorted and pawed at the ground, uneasy. "I know, old friend," Silas said, running a hand down the mule's neck. "It's a sad place, but sad don't mean cursed." He made camp that evening in the clearing, built a fire at a respectful distance from the ruins, and sat watching the flames dance while he ate a simple supper of jerky and hardtack. The stars came out brilliant and cold overhead. An owl called from the timber. The spring made its quiet music against the stones. The next morning, Silas walked the 3 miles down to the nearest town, a collection of weathered buildings called Bitter Creek. It wasn't much, maybe 30 structures total, but it had a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, and a land office. That was all a man really needed to know about a place. He tied Moses to the rail outside the general store and went inside. The place smelled of coffee, tobacco, and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with the necessities of frontier life. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat in the corner. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, weathered and lean, with sharp eyes that took Silas's measure in a heartbeat. "Help you?" the man asked. "Need some supplies," Silas said. "Nails, mostly. Some lamp oil. Coffee, if you've got it. Got all that?" The man didn't move. "You passing through? Might be staying a spell. Found an old cabin site up valley. Thinking to rebuild it before the snow flies." Something changed in the man's face. His eyes went flat. Which cabin would that be? One with the stone fireplace still standing. By the spring, maybe 3 miles north, the silence stretched out. Somewhere in the back, a clock ticked. The man finally spoke, his voice careful. "That's old Kern's place. Burned down years back. Most folks leave it be. Why's that?" The man shrugged. "Cursed, they say, bad luck. Man who lived there came to a bad end." Silas met his gaze steady. "I don't put much stock in curses. Your choice." The man turned and started pulling items off the shelves, moving with deliberate slowness. "But don't say you weren't warned." While the man gathered supplies, Silas wandered the store. On the wall near the stove hung a bulletin board covered in notices, wanted posters, and old announcements. His eye caught on a faded map of the territory, the edges curling with age. Bitter Creek was marked, and above it in the mountains, someone had written in pencil, "Kern's Claim, abandoned 1865. "That'll be $4, the man said from behind the counter. Silas paid and gathered his purchases. "Got a name?" he asked. "Jedediah. Folks call me Jed. Obliged, Jed." Silas touched the brim of his hat and headed for the door. "Mister," Jedediah called after him. Silas paused. "You seem like a decent man. Whatever you find up there, might be best to leave it buried." Silas studied the older man's face. There was something there, something that looked like old worry, maybe even guilt. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. On the ride back up the valley, Silas turned the conversation over in his mind. Kern's place, burned down. Bad end, cursed. It was the kind of talk that made a man curious, and Silas had always been the curious type. Margaret used to tease him about it. "You're like a hound on a scent," she'd say. "Never can let a mystery alone." He smiled at the memory, though it ached. She'd been right. That afternoon he began the work of clearing the cabin site. The collapsed timbers had to be moved, the ash and debris shoveled out. It was slow, dirty work, but Silas didn't mind. There was something honest about it, something that made sense in a way the world hadn't for a while. Moses grazed nearby, content in the autumn sunshine. A raven landed on the chimney and watched Silas work, head cocked to one side. "What do you think, bird?" Silas asked. "This place worth saving." The raven croaked once and flew off into the pines. By evening, Silas had cleared most of the debris from what had been the main room. The floor was stone, which was good, laid in a careful pattern that spoke of someone who'd taken pride in their work. The fireplace dominated the north wall, and as Silas worked around it, clearing away years of accumulated ash and soot, he noticed something. The hearthstone was solid granite, heavy and thick, but there was a gap along one edge, a space where the mortar had crumbled away. Silas knelt down and ran his fingers along the opening. Something was in there, wedged tight between the stone and the back wall of the fireplace. He fetched a pry bar from his gear and worked it carefully into the gap. The hearthstone resisted, then shifted with a grinding sound. Silas wedged the bar deeper and levered up. The stone lifted, and beneath it he saw the rusted edge of a metal box. His heart beat a little faster. He set the hearthstone aside and reached into the cavity. The box was maybe 10 inches long, 8 inches wide, covered in rust and ash, but still intact. A simple latch held it closed, corroded but functional. Silas carried it outside into the fading light. Moses raised his head and watched with interest. "Let's see what we've got here, old friend," Silas said. He worked the latch carefully. It took some effort, but it finally gave way with a snap. The lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly survived the decades, were several items. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame, and beneath it all, heavy and cold, a badge. A marshal's badge, blackened by fire, but still readable. Silas lifted it carefully. The engraving said, U.S. Marshal Thomas Kern. He sat there in the gathering dusk, holding the badge, and knew that his quiet winter alone had just become something else entirely. Silas didn't sleep much that night. He kept the tin box near his bedroll, protected from the dew under the canvas shelter he'd rigged between two pines. The fire burned low, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over the implications of what he'd found. A U.S. Marshal's badge didn't end up hidden in a fireplace by accident. Men didn't abandon badges. They held onto them with pride, wore them until they were too old or too dead to carry them anymore. The fact that this one was here, concealed and forgotten, meant something had gone terribly wrong for Thomas Kern. When the first light touched the peaks, Silas was already awake, feeding the fire and setting coffee to boil. Moses stood hip-shot nearby, dozing on his feet the way mules do. The morning was cold enough that Silas could see his breath, and frost silvered the grass at the edges of the clearing. He poured coffee into his tin cup and settled back against a log, the box beside him. Time to see what else was in there. He'd only glanced at the contents last night before the light failed, but now, with dawn breaking clear and bright, he could examine everything properly. The letters came out first, still tied with their ribbon. The oilcloth had protected them reasonably well, though the edges were brown with age, and the ink had faded in places. 7 letters in all, each addressed in a woman's careful hand to Thomas Kern, U.S. Marshal. No address beyond that. As if the writer had never intended to send them, or perhaps had kept copies of letters already sent. Silas untied the ribbon carefully and unfolded the first letter. The paper was thin, the kind you could buy at any general store, and the handwriting was educated, precise. It was dated April 15th, 1865. "My dearest Thomas," it began, "I received word today of your appointment as U.S. Marshal for the Montana Territory. I'm so proud of you, though I confess the news fills me with both joy and worry. You have always been a man of principle, and I know you will serve with honor. But these are dangerous times, and the territory is still wild. Please promise me you will be careful." The letter went on to discuss domestic matters, small details of a life Silas could only imagine. A garden planted, a neighbor's illness, hopes for Thomas's return. It was signed, "With all my love, your Catherine." Silas read it twice, hearing the voice of a woman who loved her husband and feared for him. Then he set it aside and picked up the second letter. This one was dated May 3rd, 1865, just weeks after the first. The tone had changed. "Thomas, your last letter troubles me. You write of nothing but this case, this stolen gold. I understand it is important, but you sound obsessed. You barely mention when you might come home. You ask after my health as an afterthought, then fill 3 pages with details about suspects and witnesses. Please, my love, do not let this consume you. No amount of gold is worth losing yourself." Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He knew this pattern. He'd seen it in soldiers who couldn't let go of a fight, in scouts who pushed too hard and too far. A man could lose himself in pursuit of something, forget what he was really fighting for. The third letter was dated June 10th, 1865. Catherine's handwriting was less steady here, the words more rushed. "You mentioned names in your last letter. Dalton. You said Captain Marcus Dalton and his men are here, living as respectable citizens, and no one questions where their money came from. You said the gold was Confederate payroll, stolen at war's end, when everything was chaos. Thomas, if these men are as dangerous as you believe, please be careful. Do not confront them alone." Silas set down the letter and stared into the fire. Confederate gold, stolen at the war's end. when the South was collapsing and men were desperate. $50,000 could set a man up for life, especially out here, where nobody asked too many questions about a man's past. And if someone came looking, asking uncomfortable questions, well, accidents happened in wild country. The fourth letter was shorter. Dated July 2nd, 1865. Thomas came to me last night and said I must go to the cabin immediately. He would not explain why, only that it was not safe for me to stay in town any longer. He looked frightened, Thomas, who has never been frightened of anything. He made me promise to stay at the cabin, to keep the door barred, to trust no one. He said he would come for me within a week, that he was close to proving everything. I'm writing this as I pack. I do not know what to think, what to feel. I only know that I am afraid. The cabin. This cabin. Catherine had been here, sent here for safety by a husband who knew he was in danger. Silas looked around the clearing, at the ruins he was rebuilding, and felt the weight of history pressing down. She had stood here, frightened and alone, waiting for a man who never came. The fifth letter was dated July 8th, 1865, written in a shakier hand. It has been 6 days. Thomas said a week at most. I'm alone here except for the sounds of the forest. Every snapping twig makes me jump. I have enough food for another week, perhaps 2 if I'm careful. I keep the pistol Thomas left me close at hand, though I pray I will not need it. At night, I think I hear horses in the distance, but when I look, there is nothing. Perhaps I am imagining things. Perhaps the solitude is affecting my mind. I tell myself Thomas will come tomorrow. Tomorrow he will ride up the trail and everything will be fine. Silas had to pause. His hands were trembling slightly, and he realized he was angry. Angry at Thomas Kern for putting his wife in this position. Angry at whoever had made it necessary. Angry at the casual cruelty of it all. A woman alone and frightened, waiting for rescue that never came. The 6th letter was dated July 15th, 1865. The handwriting was barely controlled. Someone was watching the cabin last night. I saw them in the tree line, just a shadow against the stars. They did not approach, but they were there. I stayed awake until dawn with the pistol in my lap. This morning, I found boot prints near the spring. Thomas, where are you? I am so frightened. I do not know what to do. If I leave, I might miss you. If I stay, I fear what might happen. Please, God, let him come today. 1 letter remained. Silas almost didn't want to read it, but he had to know. He unfolded the last sheet of paper, dated July 18th, 1865. The writing was rushed, desperate. They came at dawn. 3 men on horses. I hid in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor when I heard them coming. They called out, asking if anyone was home. When no one answered, they forced the door. I could hear them above me, searching, throwing things. One of them said, Kern must have the papers with him. Burn it. Make sure there's nothing left. Another said, what about the woman? The first one laughed. She's probably dead in the woods somewhere. Even if she ain't, who's going to believe a woman over us? Then I smelled smoke. They burned the cabin with me underneath it. I waited until the flames died, until I was sure they were gone. I'm writing this by moonlight in the ruins. Everything is gone. If anyone finds this, know that Thomas Kern never came back. Know that his wife Catherine waited for him, and that she loved him until the end. If you find this, Thomas never came. Silas sat motionless, the letter in his hands. The story was clear now, painted in Catherine's desperate words. Thomas Kern had been investigating a theft, had gotten too close to dangerous men, and had paid for it with his life. He'd sent Catherine here to protect her, but the men had come anyway, searching for evidence, destroying everything to cover their tracks. But Catherine had survived. She'd hidden in the root cellar while they burned her home, while they laughed about whether she was dead. The question was, what had happened to her after? He turned to the daguerreotype next, carefully removing it from its tarnished frame. The image showed a young couple, perhaps in their late 20s. The man stood straight and proud, wearing what looked like a marshal's uniform, though the details were hard to make out in the faded image. The woman sat beside him, her hand in his, her face serious but with a hint of warmth in her eyes. They looked hopeful, like people with a future ahead of them. On the back of the image, in the same careful handwriting, was written, Thomas and Catherine Kern, March 1865, the day of his appointment. Silas looked at the badge again, at the letters, at the photograph. These weren't just artifacts of a forgotten tragedy. They were evidence of a murder, of a theft, of a conspiracy that had been buried for 13 years. The question was, what should he do about it? He could walk away, pack up, ride on, find another valley to winter in. This wasn't his fight. Thomas Kern was long dead, and Catherine's fate was unknown. Whatever had happened here was over and done. But as he sat there, holding the badge in his hands, he thought about Margaret, about honor and duty and doing what was right even when it was hard. Margaret had always said he had too much conscience for his own good, that he couldn't walk past an injustice without trying to fix it. "You're a stubborn old fool, Silas Gentry," he said aloud. Moses flicked an ear in agreement. He carefully rewrapped the letters and the photograph, placed them back in the tin box along with the badge, and closed the lid. Then he stood, brushed off his pants, and looked around the clearing with new eyes. Thomas Kern had died trying to bring criminals to justice. His wife had suffered for it, had lost everything. The men responsible had gotten away with it, had probably lived these 13 years in comfort and respect, while the truth lay buried in ash and ruin. That didn't sit right with Silas, not at all. He had questions now. What had happened to Catherine after the fire? Who were these men and where were they now? What had become of the stolen gold? And most importantly, was there anyone left who cared enough to see justice done? Silas picked up his shovel and went back to work clearing the cabin site. But now his purpose had changed. He wasn't just building shelter anymore. He was uncovering the truth, one shovelful at a time. Over the next 2 days, Silas read Catherine's letters so many times he could almost recite them from memory. He read them by firelight at night, by dawn's early glow, during breaks from his work on the cabin. Each reading revealed some new detail, some small piece of the puzzle he'd missed before. The letters painted a picture of a marriage strained by duty and distance. Catherine had been supportive at first, proud of Thomas's appointment as marshal. But as the case consumed him, her worry had grown. She'd watched her husband transform from the man she loved into someone driven, obsessed, unable to think of anything beyond the stolen gold and the men who'd taken it. Silas understood that transformation. He'd seen it happen to good men, had maybe experienced it himself once or twice. When you were chasing something important, when you were close to the truth, it was easy to forget the people who mattered most. Easy to tell yourself that one more day, one more week, one more lead, and then you'd go home. Then you'd make things right. Only sometimes you ran out of time. He laid the letters out in chronological order on a flat rock near his fire. 7 letters spanning 3 months, from April to July of 1865. The first letter had been full of love and pride. Catherine had written about Thomas's appointment as marshal, about her hopes for their future together. She'd mentioned their small house in Bitter Creek, the garden she was planting, her plans to make curtains for the windows. "I know the work will be dangerous," she'd written, "but I also know that you are careful and brave and true. These qualities are why I love you, even when they take you away from me." The second letter, from early May, had shown the first signs of concern. Thomas had written to her about the case, about the stolen Confederate gold. Catherine had urged him not to let it consume him, to remember that she was waiting for him at home. "The gold has already destroyed the men who stole it," she'd written. "Do not let it destroy you as well." But the third letter, from June, revealed that her words had gone unheeded. Thomas had written to her about suspects, about evidence he was gathering. He'd mentioned Captain Marcus Dalton by name, had described how Dalton and his men were living as respectable citizens in the territory. "Their sudden wealth unquestioned. You said they have a ranch now," Catherine had written. "You said they employ half the county. Thomas, if these men are as dangerous as you believe, please do not confront them alone. Wait for help from the territorial authorities. Promise me," Silas paused at that passage. "A ranch that employed half the county." That meant power, influence, the kind of weight that could crush a lone lawman asking uncomfortable questions. Had Thomas promised to wait for help? Had he kept that promise? The answer seemed to be no. The fourth letter described Thomas arriving at their home late at night, frightened and urgent, telling Catherine she had to leave immediately for the cabin. He'd given her a pistol, supplies, told her to trust no one and wait for him. He said he had proof, Catherine had written. He said he could prove everything, that Dalton and his men had stolen 50,000 in Confederate gold. He said he just needed a few more days to make his case airtight, and then the territorial marshal would have no choice but to act. He kissed me and promised he would come for me within a week. I believed him 7 days. That was how long Catherine had waited at the cabin before she wrote her 5th letter. By then Thomas was already a day overdue, and her fear was palpable on the page. She'd been alone in the wilderness, jumping at every sound, watching the trail for a rider who never came. The 6th letter, written 8 days after Thomas had sent her to the cabin, described someone watching from the tree line. Bootprints near the spring. Catherine had been terrified, trapped between staying and hoping Thomas would come, or leaving and possibly missing him. I do not know what to do, she'd written. Every instinct tells me to run, to flee to safety. But what if Thomas comes and I am not here? What if he is hurt and needs my help? I cannot abandon him, yet I fear I am in terrible danger. And then the final letter, the one that made Silas's blood run cold every time he read it. The men had come at dawn, 3 of them. Catherine had hidden in the root cellar while they searched the cabin, while they discussed burning it to destroy evidence, while they laughed about whether Thomas's wife was already dead. She'd survived the fire by hiding below ground. She'd waited until moonlight to write her final message, a desperate record for whoever might someday find it. And then she'd done something with the letters, had hidden them carefully in the fireplace along with Thomas's badge and their photograph, preserving the evidence and the memory of what had happened, but what had happened to her after that. Silas studied the last letter again, looking for clues. Catherine had written by moonlight in the ruins of the cabin. She'd survived the fire. Where would she have gone from there? Back to Bitter Creek, where the men who'd tried to kill her lived? That seemed unlikely, even dangerous. To another town, perhaps? Into the wilderness to die of exposure? Or had she survived, made a life somewhere else, too frightened to ever speak the truth? There was something else that nagged at him. Catherine had written, if anyone finds this, Thomas never came. Not Thomas is dead or Thomas was killed, but never came, as if she didn't know for certain what had happened to him, only that he'd broken his promise to return. That suggested Thomas's body had never been found, or if it had, it hadn't been identified. The marshal had simply vanished, and his wife had vanished along with him. The cabin had burned, and with it the official story said, any evidence of what had really happened. Except the evidence was right here in Silas's hands. Letters that told of murder and theft and conspiracy. A badge that belonged to a U.S. marshal who died doing his duty. A photograph of a couple whose future had been stolen from them. Silas looked at the photograph for a long time. Thomas Kern stared back at him from across 13 years, solemn and proud in his marshal's uniform. Catherine sat beside him, her hand in his, her face gentle. They'd looked so hopeful, so certain they had time. I'm sorry, Silas said quietly to the image. Sorry for what happened to you both. But I'm going to find out the truth. I'm going to finish what you started. He didn't know if he was making a promise to a dead man or to himself. Maybe both. But he meant it. The question was where to start. He needed information, and the only place to get it was Bitter Creek, the same town where Jedediah had warned him to leave the past buried. The same town that had apparently conspired, either actively or through silence, to cover up what had happened to Thomas Kern. Going back there would be risky. If the men responsible were still around, still powerful, they wouldn't take kindly to someone asking questions. But Silas had spent 20 years navigating dangerous situations. He knew how to be careful, how to ask questions without seeming too curious, how to read people and situations. Besides, he had an advantage. As far as anyone in Bitter Creek knew, he was just a drifter looking to winter over in an old cabin. He'd mentioned finding the place, sure, but he hadn't said anything about finding a tin box full of evidence. For all they knew, he was just a lonely widower looking for shelter. Let them keep thinking that. He repacked the letters carefully, wrapped them in fresh oilcloth from his supplies, and placed them back in the tin box, along with the badge and photograph. Then he dug a hole at the base of a distinctive lightning-struck pine at the edge of the clearing, buried the box deep, and marked the spot in his mind. If anything happened to him, the evidence would still be here waiting. That done, he saddled Moses and headed back down the trail toward Bitter Creek. He needed supplies anyway, and while he was there, he could start asking careful questions. See what he could learn about Thomas Kern, about the fire, about what had really happened in the summer of 1865. The morning was clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue above the mountains. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Moses plodded along steadily, his hooves making soft sounds on the pine-needle carpet of the trail. As they descended toward the valley, Silas ran through his approach in his mind. He'd be casual, friendly, just making conversation. He'd mention that he was curious about the cabin's history, nothing more. People liked to talk, especially to strangers who seemed harmless. All he had to do was listen, pick up the threads, follow them where they led. He thought again of Margaret, of how she used to say he was too curious for his own good. She'd been right, but she'd also understood that his curiosity came from a sense of justice, a need to see wrongs made right. "This one's for you too, Maggie," he said quietly. "You always did want me to use my stubbornness for something worthwhile." Moses flicked an ear, and together they continued down the mountain toward whatever truth was waiting in the valley below. That night, camped in the clearing under a sky brilliant with stars, Silas couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the pieces of the puzzle, trying to fit them together into something that made sense. He had Catherine's letters. He had Thomas Kern's badge. He had Jedediah's reluctant confirmation that Marcus Brennan was likely Marcus Dalton. He had a grave in the woods that probably held a murdered marshal. What he didn't have was proof that would convince a territorial marshal to investigate, let alone arrest one of the most powerful men in Montana Territory. 13 years was a long time. Memories faded, witnesses died or moved on, and physical evidence disappeared. All Brennan had to do was maintain his story, and without compelling proof to the contrary, he'd remain untouchable. Silas rose before dawn and retrieved the tin box from its hiding place beneath the lightning-struck pine. He spread its contents on a flat rock and studied them by the light of his lantern. The letters, the badge, the photograph. What was he missing? He read through the letters again, slowly, looking for details he might have overlooked. In the third letter, Catherine mentioned that Thomas had written to her about his investigation. That meant Kern had kept notes, records of his findings. Where were those notes now? The cabin had burned, but Catherine had managed to save these items. Had she saved anything else? Had Thomas hidden his investigation records somewhere, knowing he might not survive? Silas looked at the fireplace where he'd found the tin box. It had been wedged deep in a crevice, protected from the worst of the fire. Could there be other hiding places? As the sun rose, he began a systematic search of the cabin ruins. He moved slowly, carefully, examining every stone of the foundation, every section of the collapsed walls. The work was painstaking, and twice he had to stop and rest his back, which ached from bending. Around midday, while examining the base of the chimney, he noticed something odd. One of the large foundation stones on the exterior side seemed to sit differently than the others. He got his pry bar and worked at it carefully. The stone shifted, and behind it he found a narrow cavity. Inside the cavity was a leather satchel, wrapped in the same kind of oilcloth as the letters. Silas pulled it out carefully, his heart beating faster. The leather was old, stiff, but intact. He carried it out into the sunlight and opened it. Inside were papers, carefully folded. He unfolded them with shaking hands. They were covered in neat handwriting, the same precise script from the letters. Thomas Kern's hand. The first page was dated May 10th, 1865, entitled Investigation into the Theft of Confederate Treasury Funds. Silas read through the document slowly, absorbing every word. Kern had been thorough. He documented the theft of $50,000 in Confederate gold coins, taken from a payroll shipment in the final days of the war. The theft had been carried out by 5 men, Captain Marcus Dalton, Lieutenant James Hartley, and 3 enlisted men named Carson, Price, and Sullivan. The 5 had deserted together, taking the gold with them. They'd been tracked west into the territories, where the trail had gone cold. Then in the spring of 1865, Kern had received a tip that a man matching Dalton's description had appeared in Montana Territory with significant capital. Kern's notes detailed his investigation. He'd talked to merchants who'd sold supplies to Brennan. He'd interviewed men who'd worked for Brennan in the early days. Slowly, carefully, he'd built a case. The timeline matched. Brennan had appeared just weeks after the gold theft, with money to spend, and 4 companions who matched the descriptions of Dalton's men. But more than that, Kern had found a witness. A former Confederate soldier named William Hodges had recognized Brennan as Dalton. Hodges had served under Dalton briefly and was willing to testify. Kern's notes recorded that Hodges was living in a mining camp 40 miles north of Bitter Creek. The final entry in the satchel was dated July 1st, 1865. The day before Kern had sent Catherine to the cabin, I confronted Brennan today. Told him I knew who he was, what he'd done. He denied everything, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knows I have enough to bring charges. Tomorrow I ride to Helena to meet with the territorial marshal. Hodges has agreed to come with me and give testimony. Once I have official support, I'll return for Catherine. By this time next week, Marcus Dalton will be in custody, and the gold will be recovered. Justice will be done. Silas stared at the words. Kern had been so confident, so sure of his case. He'd had a witness, documentation, enough evidence to convince the territorial authorities. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd told Brennan he was going to Helena. He'd given Dalton warning, time to act, and Dalton had acted. He'd sent men to kill Kern, probably ambushed him on the trail before he could reach Helena. They'd found Catherine at the cabin and tried to kill her too, burning the place to destroy any evidence. The witness, William Hodges, had probably been killed as well, or scared into silence, but Kern had hidden his investigation notes just as Catherine had hidden the letters. They'd both known the danger, had both tried to preserve the truth for someone someday to find. Silas looked through the satchel again and found one more item, a small photograph, different from the one of Thomas and Catherine. This one showed 5 men in Confederate uniforms standing in front of a tent. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Dalton's Company, March 1865. He studied the faces. One man stood in the center, taller than the others, with a commanding presence even in the grainy image. His face was young, maybe 30, with sharp features and intense eyes. That would be Dalton. Silas pulled out the photograph from the tin box, the one of Thomas and Catherine. He held them side by side, these 2 images from 13 years ago. Kern and Dalton, the lawman and the thief, frozen in time. One had died pursuing justice. The other had built an empire on stolen gold, but now Silas had everything. The letters, the badge, Kern's investigation notes, the photographs. He had evidence of the theft, of Dalton's identity, of Kern's murder. It might not be enough for a court of law, not after 13 years, but it was enough to bring pressure, to demand investigation, to break the silence that had protected Marcus Brennan for so long. The question was how to use it. If he went to the territorial authorities in Helena, Brennan would hear about it. The man had connections, power. He could make problems disappear. But if Silas confronted Brennan directly, demanded confession or restitution, he'd be putting himself in grave danger. He needed an ally, someone with authority or influence who couldn't be intimidated. But who? Everyone in Bitter Creek was either employed by Brennan or too frightened to stand against him. Silas carefully repacked the satchel and the tin box, then buried them both in separate locations, marking each hiding spot in his mind. If something happened to him, the evidence would still be here, waiting. As he worked, a thought occurred to him. Catherine's last letter had said, "If anyone finds this, Thomas never came." But what if Catherine had survived the fire and escaped? What if she was still alive somewhere, the only living witness to what had happened? It was a slim hope, but it was something. If he could find Catherine Kern, if she was still alive after 13 years, her testimony combined with the evidence would be impossible to ignore. The question was where to start looking. Catherine had been alone, frightened, hunted. Where would a woman in her position go? Not back to Bitter Creek, not to anywhere Dalton's men might find her. She'd have to disappear, change her name, start over somewhere new. But she'd also been Thomas Kern's wife, married to a lawman. She'd have wanted justice, even if she'd been too frightened to seek it immediately. She'd have held on to hope that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. Silas made his decision. He'd keep working on the cabin, maintaining his cover as a stubborn drifter. But he'd also start searching for Catherine Kern, quietly, carefully. If she was alive, he'd find her. And together, they'd finish what Thomas Kern had started. Over the next week, Silas worked on the cabin during the day and searched the ruins more carefully at night. If Catherine had survived the fire by hiding in the root cellar, that cellar might hold more clues. The problem was finding it. The fire and 13 years of weather had obscured almost everything. He approached the task methodically, the way he'd been trained as a scout. Root cellars were typically dug near the main cabin for easy access, usually on the north side, where the earth stayed cooler. They needed good drainage and solid walls. He looked for depressions in the ground, places where the earth might have settled over a hollow space. On the 8th day, while clearing debris from the north side of the foundation, his shovel broke through into empty space. He knelt down and carefully enlarged the opening, revealing a hole about 4 feet deep. The root cellar, partially collapsed but still intact. Silas lowered himself down carefully, testing the earthen walls before trusting his weight to them. The space was small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with shelving built into the walls. Most of the shelves had rotted away, and the few jars that remained were broken. But in the far corner, wedged behind a fallen timber, he saw something that didn't belong. He pulled it free carefully. It was a book, wrapped in oilcloth like the other items. A journal bound in leather, with a clasp that still worked. His hands trembled as he opened it. The first page. In Catherine's handwriting, Personal Diary of Catherine Ann Kern. If found, please deliver to my family in St. Louis, Missouri. Silas climbed out of the cellar and sat in the sunlight, the diary in his hands. This was it. Catherine's own account of what had happened. He opened to the first entry, dated April 1st, 1865, just 2 weeks before Thomas had been appointed marshal. The early entries were ordinary. Catherine wrote about daily life, about her hopes for their future, about small domestic concerns. She mentioned friends in St. Louis, her parents, sisters. She wrote about being excited to start a new life in Montana Territory with Thomas. But as Silas read forward, the entries changed. Catherine's worry about Thomas's obsession with the gold case grew with each page. She wrote about arguments, about nights Thomas didn't come home, about the way he'd changed from the man she'd married. Then came the entry from July 3rd, 1865, the day after Thomas sent her to the cabin. I am at the cabin, as Thomas insisted. He came to our home after midnight, woke me from sleep. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He said I had to leave immediately, that I was in danger. He gave me his pistol and told me to shoot anyone who approached except him. When I asked what was happening, he would only say that he'd confronted Brennan, that he knew everything, and that Brennan knew he knew. He said he was riding to Helena at dawn to meet with the territorial marshal. He made me promise to stay here, to tell no one where I was, to wait for him. He held me so tightly. I knew he was frightened, though he tried to hide it. That frightened me more than anything. Silas read on, through entries that matched the letters he'd already found. Catherine's growing fear, her isolation, her desperate hope that Thomas would return. Then came the entry from July 18th, 1865, the day the cabin burned. I heard them coming at dawn. 3 horses. I looked through a crack in the door and saw 3 men, rough-looking, with guns. They called out, asking if anyone was home. I remembered Thomas's words about trusting no one. I remembered the pistol in my hand. I didn't answer. They forced the door. I could hear them above me in the cabin, searching, throwing things. One of them said Kern must have the papers with him. Another said to burn everything, make sure nothing was left. Then one laughed and said, "What about the woman?" "Oh, the first man said I was probably dead in the woods." They laughed about it. Then I smelled smoke. Silas read the next part slowly, his chest tight. The cabin burned above me. I could hear the timbers cracking, feel the heat. Smoke came down through the floorboards. I thought I would die there, suffocate in the darkness. But there was a gap in the cellar wall, a place where the earth had pulled away from the stones. I dug at it with my hands, making it wider. The men were outside, watching the cabin burn. I could hear them talking, laughing. When the roof collapsed, they rode away. I waited until nightfall, until I was certain they were gone. Then I climbed out into the ruins. The next entry was longer, written in a shakier hand. "I am alive, but I do not know for how long. The cabin is gone. Everything I brought with me is ash. But I saved Thomas's investigation papers and his badge, the things he'd hidden in the fireplace before he sent me here. I saved our photograph. I wrote letters in case something happened, in case I died before I could tell anyone the truth. I hid everything carefully. If someone finds this, they will know what happened. They will know that Marcus Brennan is Marcus Dalton, that he murdered my husband, that he tried to murder me." Silas turned the page, expecting the diary to end there. But there were more entries, spanning weeks and then months. Catherine had survived. July 20th, 1865. I walked east through the mountains. I avoided trails, stayed in the timber. I'm weak from hunger and fear, but I am alive. I keep moving. July 25th, 1865. I reached a mining camp. I told them my name was Catherine Wells, that I was widowed, that I'd gotten lost in the mountains. They believed me. If family took me in, gave me food and shelter, they asked no questions. I am grateful. August 10th, 1865. I received devastating news today. I'm carrying Thomas's child. I'm 2 months along, perhaps 3. I had suspected but was not certain. Now I am. This changes everything. I cannot seek justice now. If I go to the authorities, if I testify against Brennan, I put my unborn child at risk. Brennan's men will hunt me. They will kill me and the baby both. I cannot allow that. Thomas's child is all I have left of him. This baby must live. Silas stopped reading, overcome. Catherine had been pregnant. She'd survived the fire, escaped through the mountains, only to realize she was carrying Thomas Kern's child. She'd made an impossible choice, justice or survival. She'd chosen survival. The diary entries continued, chronicling Catherine's life in the mining camp, her pregnancy, her decision to stay silent about what had happened. She wrote about the guilt, about feeling like she was betraying Thomas by not speaking up. But she also wrote about feeling the baby move inside her, about the fierce need to protect this new life. October 15th, 1865. I felt the baby kick today. A strong kick, determined, like his father. Yes, I think it is a boy. I will name him Samuel, Samuel Thomas Kern. Though the world will know him as Samuel Wells, I will tell him the truth when he is old enough to understand. I will tell him his father was a hero who died pursuing justice. I will tell him everything. The entries became less frequent after that. Catherine wrote about Samuel's birth in March 1866, about the challenges of raising a child alone, about the constant fear that someone would recognize her. She moved from the mining camp to a small settlement, then to Helena, always careful, always watchful. The last entry was dated November 1876, more than a year ago. Samuel is now 10 years old. He is strong and good and kind, so much like his father. He knows nothing of the truth. I've protected him by staying silent, by living a quiet life far from Bitter Creek, but I am tired of carrying this secret. I'm tired of letting Marcus Brennan live in comfort while Thomas lies in an unmarked grave. I've decided that when Samuel is grown, when he is old enough to protect himself, I will tell him everything. I will give him this diary, Thomas's badge, the letters and papers. I will give him the choice I never had, whether to seek justice or let the past remain buried. Whatever he chooses, I will support. But he deserves to know the truth about his father. He deserves to know that Thomas Kern was a man of honor who died fighting for what was right. That was the final entry. Silas closed the diary and sat in silence for a long moment. Catherine had survived. She'd raised Thomas Kern's son in secret, protecting him from the truth to keep him safe. She'd lived with the guilt and the fear for more than 11 years, waiting until Samuel was old enough before giving him the choice. But the diary had never been given to Samuel. It had remained hidden in the root cellar all these years, which meant one of two things. Either Catherine had died before she could tell her son the truth, or she'd changed her mind and decided to let the past stay buried. Silas needed to know which. He needed to find Samuel Kern, or Samuel Wells, as the world knew him. The boy would be around 12 or 13 now, if he was still alive. If Catherine had died, he might have been taken in by relatives, or ended up in an orphanage, or made his own way in the world. But somewhere out there was the son of Thomas and Catherine Kern, a living witness to this story. A boy who had every right to know the truth about his parents, about his father's heroism and his mother's courage. Silas looked at the diary again, at Thomas Kern's badge, at all the evidence he'd gathered. He wasn't just investigating a cold case anymore. He was pursuing the truth on behalf of a child who'd been denied his heritage, his history, his name. That changed everything. He carefully wrapped the diary and added it to the hidden evidence. Then he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would ride to Helena and start searching for Catherine Wells and her son Samuel. It was a long shot. 11 years was a long time, and people moved, disappeared, died. But he had to try, because this wasn't just about justice for Thomas Kern anymore. It was about a boy's right to know who his father was. It was about giving Samuel the truth his mother had wanted him to have. And if Marcus Brennan learned that Thomas Kern had a son, a living heir who could testify about his mother's story, the old man would panic. He'd make mistakes, and those mistakes would be Silas's opportunity to finally bring him down. The hunt had just taken a new direction, and for the first time since finding the tin box, Silas felt genuine hope. Silas made his preparations carefully. He couldn't just ride off to Helena and leave the cabin unguarded, not with Brennan's men watching. He needed to make it look like he was staying put, working on his winter shelter, unaware of anything beyond his immediate concerns. For 2 days, he worked visibly on the cabin, making sure anyone watching would see him sawing timber, hammering joints, acting like a man focused solely on practical matters. But at night, he prepared for his journey. He cleaned and oiled his weapons, packed supplies for a week's travel, and made copies of the most important documents in Thomas Kern's investigation file. The originals he buried in 3 separate locations around the clearing, each spot marked in his memory. If anything happened to him, the evidence would remain, waiting for someone else to find. But he'd carry copies with him to Helena, along with Catherine's diary and the photograph of Thomas and Catherine together. On the 3rd morning, before dawn, he saddled Moses quietly and led him away from the cabin on foot, staying in the timber until they were well down the valley. Only when he was certain no one was following did he mount and turn toward Helena. The ride took 2 days. Helena was a substantial town, grown wealthy on gold and silver strikes, with broad streets and buildings that spoke of prosperity. It had hotels, banks, law offices, and a federal courthouse. More importantly, it had records: birth records, death records, property transactions, marriage licenses. If Catherine Wells had lived here, if she'd raised her son here, there would be traces. Silas started at the courthouse, asking to see birth records from 1866. The clerk, a precise young man with ink-stained fingers, brought out the ledger. Silas ran his finger down the entries, looking for the name Samuel Wells. There were 4 boys born with that first name in Helena that year, but only one whose mother was listed as Catherine Wells, widow. Born March 15th, 1866. "I'm looking for this boy," Silas said, pointing to the entry. "Would there be any way to find out what became of the family?" The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "That's 12 years ago. People move. But you might check property records, see if a Catherine Wells owned or rented anything. The property records showed Catherine Wells had rented a small house on the east side of Helena from 1867 to 1876. Then the trail went cold. No more rent payments, no property purchases, nothing. What happened in 1876? Silas asked. The clerk thought for a moment. That was a hard winter. Lot of folks died. There was influenza that came through, took quite a few. Silas's heart sank. He asked to see the death records from 1876. The clerk brought another ledger, this one with pages marked by solemn black ink. There it was. Catherine Wells died December 3rd, 1876, influenza. Age given as 36. Beside her name was another entry. Samuel Wells, age 10, orphaned, placed with St. Joseph's Home for Children, an orphanage. Samuel had been alone since he was 10 years old, never knowing the truth about his father, never receiving the diary his mother had meant to give him. Silas felt a surge of anger at the cruel timing. Catherine had survived 13 years, had raised her son in safety, had kept the secret all that time, only to die before she could tell him the truth. St. Joseph's, Silas said. Is that still operating? Yes, sir. It's on the north end of town, near the Catholic Church. Silas found St. Joseph's Home for Children just before noon. It was a large wooden building, well maintained, with a yard where several children were playing under the supervision of a nun in a black habit. He tied Moses to the fence and approached the front door. The woman who answered his knock was in her 50s, with a kind face and wise eyes. She introduced herself as Sister Margaret, the director of the home. I'm looking for information about a boy who was placed here in 1876, Silas said. Samuel Wells. His mother died of influenza. Sister Margaret's face softened with recognition. Samuel, yes, I remember him. A quiet boy, very polite, always reading when he could find books. He was with us for 3 years. Was. He turned 13 in 1879 and asked if he could leave to find work. That's not unusual. Many of our children leave when they're old enough to support themselves. We helped him find a position at a ranch outside of town, the Rocking H, owned by a man named Henry Sutton. Good man, treats his workers fairly. Is Samuel still there? As far as I know, he comes to visit occasionally, brings donations when he can spare it. He's grown into a fine young man. Sister Margaret paused. May I ask why you're looking for him? Silas chose his words carefully. I have information about his family, things his mother wanted him to know. She died before she could tell him. Sister Margaret studied his face, then nodded slowly. Samuel never knew much about his parents. His mother told him his father died before he was born, but she was always vague about the details. The boy used to ask questions, but after she died, there was no one to answer them. If you have information that might help him understand where he came from, I think that would be a kindness. Can you tell me how to find the Rocking H? About 15 miles northeast of here. Follow the main road toward the mountains, then take the North Fork when you see the painted rock. The ranch is in a valley, hard to miss. Lodge barn, white with red trim. Silas thanked her and left, his mind racing. Samuel Wells was alive, just 15 miles away. A young man now, 22 or 23 years old, working an honest job, completely unaware that his father had been a U.S. marshal who died a hero, unaware that his mother had hidden the truth to protect him, unaware that his real name was Samuel Thomas Kern. The ride to the Rocking H took most of the afternoon. Sister Margaret's directions were accurate. The ranch sat in a broad valley with good grass and a creek running through it. The barn was exactly as she'd described, and near it stood a solid ranch house and several outbuildings. Silas rode up to the main house and dismounted. A man in his 50s came out onto the porch, sizing him up with a rancher's practiced eye. Help you. Name's Silas Gentry. I'm looking for a man named Samuel Wells. Sister Margaret at St. Joseph's said he works here. The rancher, who Silas assumed was Henry Sutton, nodded. Sam's one of my hands. Good worker, reliable. He in some kind of trouble? No trouble. I have information about his family that I need to share with him. Sutton studied him for a moment, then called toward the barn. Sam got a visitor. A young man emerged from the barn, brushing hay from his shirt. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair and a lean build. As he walked closer, Silas's breath caught. The resemblance was unmistakable. Samuel had his father's eyes, his father's strong jawline. Looking at him was like seeing Thomas Kern's photograph come to life. Samuel approached, curious but wary. "You wanted to see me?" "Samuel Wells?" Silas asked, though he already knew. "That's right. My name is Silas Gentry. I've been working on an old cabin in the Bitterroot Range, near a town called Bitter Creek. While I was there, I found something that belongs to you. Something your mother wanted you to have." Samuel's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "My mother? She died years ago, I know. But before she died, she left something behind. Something that tells the story of who your father was. My father died before I was born. My mother told me that. That's what she told you to protect you," Silas said gently. "But the truth is different. Your father was a U.S. marshal named Thomas Kern. He was murdered in 1865 while investigating a crime. Your mother survived the fire that was meant to kill her, and she raised you under a different name to keep you safe." Samuel stared at him, his face going pale. "That's not possible." "It is possible, and it's true. I have proof. Your mother's diary, your father's badge, letters she wrote, investigation records, everything." Silas pulled the photograph from his pocket, the one of Thomas and Catherine. "This is your parents on the day your father was appointed marshal." Samuel took the photograph with shaking hands. He stared at the image for a long moment. "This is my mother," he said quietly. "I recognize her face. I have one photograph of her, taken when I was small. This is definitely her." He looked at the man in the photograph. "And this is my father, Thomas Kern, U.S. Marshal. He died trying to bring criminals to justice. Your mother survived long enough to raise you, but she died before she could tell you the truth." Samuel looked up, his eyes wet. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" "Because I found the evidence, and I believe your father deserves justice. But more than that, I believe you deserve to know who you are, who you really are. Your mother wanted you to have this information when you were old enough. She wrote it all down, kept it safe, meant to tell you. She just ran out of time." Henry Sutton had been listening from the porch. He came down now, putting a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Sam, why don't you and Mr. Gentry come inside? This sounds like a conversation that needs time and privacy." They sat in Sutton's parlor, and Silas told the whole story. He showed Samuel the diary, read passages aloud. He explained about the stolen Confederate gold, about Marcus Dalton, who became Marcus Brennan, about how Thomas Kern had been murdered and Catherine had barely escaped. He told about finding the cabin, the hidden evidence, the grave in the woods. Samuel listened to it all, his face a mixture of shock, grief, and growing anger. When Silas finished, the young man sat in silence for several minutes. "My whole life," Samuel finally said, "I thought I was nobody, an orphan with no history, no family, nothing. My mother never talked about where we came from or who my father was. I thought he must have been someone she was ashamed of, or maybe someone who'd abandoned us. I never imagined this. Your mother loved your father deeply," Silas said, "and she loved you enough to sacrifice justice to keep you safe." That took courage. "And now," Samuel asked, "what happens now?" "That's up to you. The evidence exists. Your father's investigation notes, your mother's testimony in her diary, physical proof of what happened. With your testimony about your mother's story, we might be able to bring charges against Marcus Brennan. But it won't be easy. He's powerful, wealthy, connected, and it could put you in danger." Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch, at the mountains beyond. When he turned back, his jaw was set with determination that reminded Silas powerfully of Thomas Kern. "My father died trying to do what was right," Samuel said. "My mother lived in fear for 13 years to protect me. I'm not going to let their sacrifices be for nothing. Whatever it takes, whoever this Brennan is, he needs to answer for what he did. I want justice for my parents." "It's a hard road," Silas warned. "Brennan will fight back. He has resources, men who will do his bidding. We'll need more than just evidence. We'll need a plan, then we'll make a plan." Samuel's voice was steady. "But first I need to see this cabin. I need to see where my mother hid during the fire, where my father is buried. I need to understand what happened." Henry Sutton spoke up. "Sam, you know I'll support whatever you decide. If you need time away from the ranch, take it. If you need help, ask. This is important." "Thank you, Henry." Samuel turned back to Silas. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're ready. But there's something else you need to know. Marcus Brennan is still alive. He's in his 60s now, but he's still running things. And when he finds out Thomas Kern had a son, when he realizes you know the truth, he'll see you as a threat." "Let him," Samuel said, his voice hard. "I've spent my whole life not knowing who I was. Now I know. I'm Samuel Thomas Kern, son of a U.S. marshal who died fighting for justice. And I intend to finish what my father started." Silas felt a surge of pride and worry in equal measure. This young man had courage, had determination. But he was untested, inexperienced in the kind of danger they were facing. Still, he had the right to know, the right to seek justice, the right to claim his father's name. "Then we'll do it together," Silas said. "But we do it smart. We gather all the evidence, make copies, send one set to the territorial marshal in case something happens to us. We document everything, get witnesses who'll testify. And we don't confront Brennan until we're ready." "Agreed." Samuel extended his hand. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for caring enough about two strangers to pursue this." Silas shook his hand. "Your parents deserve to have their story told. And you deserve to know the truth about who you are." That night, Silas stayed at the ranch as Sutton's guest. He watched Samuel reading through his mother's diary by lamplight, saw the young man's face as he learned about his parents' love, his mother's fear, his father's courage. It was hard to witness, the grief and anger and pride all mixed together, but it was also necessary. Samuel needed to understand what he was stepping into, what he was fighting for. Around midnight, Samuel closed the diary and looked up at Silas with red-rimmed eyes. "There's something I need to know," he said. "In my mother's things, the ones I inherited when she died, there was a small box. In it was a document, folded and sealed. I never opened it because it was addressed to me when I came of age, and then she died before I turned 21. I kept it, but I never felt right about opening it without her permission, foolish as that sounds." Silas leaned forward. "Where is this document now?" "In my room here at the ranch. Would you like to see it?" "I would." Samuel retrieved it, a piece of parchment folded and sealed with wax, though the seal had cracked with age. On the outside, in Catherine's handwriting, "To my son Samuel, to be opened when he reaches his majority." "You're 23 now," Silas said. "I'd say that qualifies." Samuel carefully broke the seal and unfolded the document. As he read, his eyes widened. "It's a land deed, to the cabin property, in my father's name, Thomas Kern." And below it my mother added a note. "This land is yours by right of inheritance. It is all I have to give you of your father's legacy. When you are ready, claim it. Build on it. Make it a place of peace, not sorrow. Your loving mother, Catherine." Silas felt the pieces clicking into place. "That means you're the legal owner of the land Marcus Brennan claims. That gives us leverage. He can't just threaten to run you off property that's legally yours." "More than that," Samuel said, a fierce light in his eyes. "It means I can rebuild that cabin. I can honor my parents by finishing what they started. And Brennan can't do a damned thing to stop me." The two men looked at each other, understanding passing between them. They had evidence, they had a witness, and now they had legal standing. They had everything they needed to challenge Marcus Brennan's decades of lies. The question was whether it would be enough to bring him down, or whether the old thief still had enough power to bury the truth one more time. They rode out at first light, Silas and Samuel together, with Moses carrying their supplies and Samuel on a sturdy bay gelding borrowed from Sutton. The journey back to the cabin took 2 days, and during that time, Silas watched the young man carefully. Samuel asked good questions, listened well, and showed none of the recklessness Silas had feared. He was thoughtful, deliberate, processing the enormity of what he'd learned. On the second evening, as they made camp in a meadow halfway to Bitter Creek, Samuel spoke about his childhood. I used to ask my mother about my father, he said, poking at the fire with a stick. She'd get this look on her face, sad but also frightened. She'd say he was a good man who died too young, and that she didn't like to talk about it because it hurt too much. I learned to stop asking. I thought I was being kind, not pressing her on painful memories. She was protecting you, Silas said, in the only way she knew how. I understand that now. But I wish I'd known him, even just known about him. Samuel looked up. Do you think he would have been a good father? From everything I've learned about Thomas Kern, he was a man of principle and courage. He fought for what was right, even when it cost him everything. I think he would have been an excellent father. And my mother, you never knew her, but from the diary, she was remarkable, Silas said firmly. She survived a fire meant to kill her, escaped through wilderness alone, raised you by herself, all while carrying a secret that could have gotten you both killed. She was stronger than most soldiers I've known. Samuel was quiet for a moment. I have their courage in me, then. I'll need it. The next afternoon they reached the cabin. Samuel dismounted slowly, taking in the half-rebuilt structure, the clearing, the mountains rising beyond. His eyes were wet. This is where they lived, he said quietly. Where my mother waited for my father. Where she hid to survive. Silas showed him everything. The fireplace where the tin box had been hidden. The root cellar where Catherine had sheltered during the fire. The grave in the woods, beneath the lightning-struck spruce. Samuel stood at that grave for a long time, hat in hand, saying goodbye to a father he'd never known. Then Silas retrieved all the hidden evidence. The letters, the badge, the investigation notes, the photographs, the diary. He spread them out on a flat rock, and Samuel examined each piece carefully, reverently, as if handling sacred relics. This is my father's badge, Samuel said, holding it up to the light. The blackened metal gleamed dully. He wore this. He carried the weight of the law with this. And now you carry his legacy, Silas said. The question is what we do with it. We take it to Marcus Brennan, Samuel said, his voice steady. We show him what we have. We give him the chance to confess, to make restitution. And if he refuses, we take it to the territorial marshal in Helena. He won't confess. Men like him don't. Then we go to Helena. But we give him the chance. We do it right, the way my father would have wanted. Silas considered the young man's words. There was wisdom there, and honor. All right. But first we make copies of everything. We send one set to Helena today by courier. That way, if Brennan tries anything, the evidence still exists. How do we get a courier out here? There's a man in Bitter Creek, runs the telegraph office. Name's Paulson. He's not on Brennan's payroll, and he's trustworthy. I'll ride down tonight, arrange it. They spent the afternoon carefully copying Thomas Kern's investigation notes, transcribing key passages from the diary. Samuel's handwriting was neat and careful, learned from the nuns at St. Joseph's. He worked with focus, as if this documentation was itself an act of justice. By evening, they had a complete set of copies. Silas wrapped them in oilcloth, sealed them, and addressed the package to the territorial marshal in Helena. I'll be back before midnight, he said, swinging into Moses's saddle. Keep the rifle close, stay alert. If anyone comes, anyone at all, don't confront them. Disappear into the timber and wait for me. I'll be careful, Samuel promised. The ride down to Bitter Creek in the gathering dusk was tense. Silas kept to the shadows, moving quietly. The town was mostly dark when he arrived, but Paulson's telegraph office showed lamplight. He knocked quietly. Paulson, a thin man with grey hair and nervous hands, opened the door a crack. When he saw Silas, he opened it wider. Gentry. Didn't expect to see you tonight? Need a favor. Need this package delivered to Helena, to the territorial marshal. It's important, and it needs to arrive safely. Paulson took the package, weighing it in his hands. This got something to do with the Brennan business? It might. Figured as much. Whole town's been talking about you, about how you won't leave the cabin despite warnings. Some folks are taking bets on how long you'll last. He looked Silas in the eye. I hope you know what you're doing. So do I. I'll get this on tomorrow's stage, personal delivery. It'll be in Helena in 3 days. I'm obliged. Silas handed him payment for the service. As he turned to leave, Paulson called after him quietly. Gentry, be careful. Brennan's getting nervous. Word is he's been asking questions about you. About what you're really doing up there. Let him ask, Silas said, and rode back into the night. When he returned to the cabin, Samuel was waiting by a small, carefully concealed fire. All set? All set. In 3 days, the territorial marshal will have everything. Now we wait 1 more day for the package to get far enough away that Brennan can't stop it. Then we make our move. Samuel nodded, his young face serious in the firelight. Tomorrow we prepare. The day after, we ride to the Brennan Ranch. The day after, Silas agreed, we face the man who killed your father. The Brennan Ranch sprawled across the valley floor like an empire. From the ridge above, Silas and Samuel could see the main house, large and well built, the barn that could house 40 horses, the bunkhouse for the ranch hands, corrals and outbuildings stretching across good grassland. This was what 50,000 in stolen gold had built, a legacy of prosperity founded on murder and theft. Impressive, Samuel said quietly. My father's death bought all this. Your father's death and the silence of everyone who knew the truth, Silas replied. But silence ends today. They rode down openly, making no attempt at concealment. This was a formal visit, a reckoning. They wore their best clothes, rode straight-backed, carried themselves with the dignity of men on righteous business. Silas had his rifle in its scabbard but hoped he wouldn't need it. Samuel wore no weapon per their agreement. This was about truth, not violence. Ranch hands stopped their work to watch as the 2 strangers rode up to the main house. A man Silas recognized, Cole Brennan, the foreman, stepped out of the barn, his hand automatically going to his pistol. Gentry, Cole said, his voice hard. I warned you. This isn't about the cabin, Silas replied calmly. We're here to speak with Marcus Brennan. It's a matter of justice that's been waiting 13 years. Cole's eyes narrowed. The old man don't take visitors. He'll take us. Samuel spoke for the first time, his voice clear and steady. Tell him Thomas Kern's son is here. The effect was immediate. Cole's face went pale, and for a moment he seemed frozen. Then he turned and walked quickly to the house, disappearing inside. Silas and Samuel waited, sitting their horses quietly. More ranch hands gathered, sensing something significant was happening. The air felt charged, electric with tension. After several minutes, Cole emerged, followed by an older man who walked with a cane but still carried himself with authority. Marcus Brennan was tall despite his years, with white hair and a face that might have been called distinguished if you didn't know what lay behind it. His eyes, when they fixed on Samuel, showed shock and something that might have been fear. You say you're Thomas Kern's son, Brennan said, his voice controlled. Kern had no son. He did, Samuel replied. Born 6 months after you murdered him. Raised by my mother Catherine, who survived the fire you set to kill her. Brennan's jaw tightened. That's quite an accusation, young man. Kern died 13 years ago. Could have been anything. Indians, outlaws, an accident. It wasn't, Silas said, pulling out the leather satchel. We have Thomas Kern's complete investigation notes. We have Catherine Kern's diary describing the day your men came to burn the cabin while she hid in the root cellar. We have letters, photographs, and physical evidence. We know you're really Marcus Dalton, Confederate captain who stole 50,000 in gold at war's end. We know everything. For a long moment, Brennan said nothing. The ranch hands had drawn closer, listening. Cole's hand was on his pistol, but he seemed uncertain. This wasn't a situation that could be solved with violence, not with so many witnesses, not with accusations spoken so openly. You have no proof, Brennan finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. We have all the proof needed, Samuel said, and copies of that proof are already in Helena on their way to the territorial marshal. We came here first to give you a chance to confess, to tell the truth, to make whatever peace you can with what you've done. You took my father from me before I was born. You tried to kill my mother. You've lived 13 years on blood money, while my parents lay in unmarked graves. I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you admit what you did. The old man's face worked, emotions warring across it. Pride, fear, anger, and perhaps something that might have been regret. The silence stretched out, broken only by the wind moving through the grass, the distant sound of cattle lowing. I was a different man then, Brennan finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The war had just ended. Everything was chaos. We took the gold because we believed the Confederacy owed us for our service. We came west to start over, and my father, Samuel pressed. Tell me about him. Brennan's shoulders sagged. Kern was relentless. He tracked us for months, gathered evidence, interviewed people. He was going to destroy everything we'd built. I sent men to warn him off, to scare him, but he wouldn't stop. He said he had a witness, that he was going to Helena to bring federal marshals. He stopped, unable to continue. You had him killed, Samuel finished. Say it. I had him killed, Brennan admitted, the words falling like stones. I didn't want to, but I couldn't let him take everything. We ambushed him on the trail to Helena, made it quick. Then we went to the cabin for any evidence he'd left behind. We didn't know his wife was there. We just wanted to destroy the cabin, eliminate anything that could connect us to the gold. My mother was there, Samuel said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. She hid in the cellar while you burned her home. She heard your men laugh about whether she was dead. I didn't know. Brennan looked at Samuel with haunted eyes. I swear I didn't know she was there. Didn't know she survived. Didn't know about you. If I had known, you would have killed us both, Samuel finished coldly. Brennan had no answer to that. He stood there exposed and broken, his empire built on theft and murder finally revealed for what it was. Around them, the ranch hands shifted uncomfortably. Some looked shocked, others angry. Cole Brennan's hand had fallen away from his pistol, his face sick with the realization of what his employer truly was. The territorial marshal is already reviewing the evidence, Silas said. Federal marshals will be here within the week. You can run, or you can face justice. But either way, the truth is known now. Thomas Kern's name will be cleared. His son will inherit the land that's rightfully his. And you'll answer for what you've done. Marcus Brennan looked at Samuel one last time, and in that look was acknowledgement, guilt, and something that might have been sorrow. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. Better than I ever was. I'm sorry. Then he turned and walked back into his house, an old man finally facing the weight of his sins. 6 weeks later, Silas stood in the clearing, watching Samuel drive the last nail into the cabin's new door. The structure was complete now, solid and weatherproof, built with care on the foundation of what had been. But this wasn't the same cabin that had burned 13 years ago. This was something new, something built on truth rather than hidden in fear. The territorial marshal had arrived 3 weeks after their confrontation with Brennan. Federal warrants had been issued. Marcus Brennan, too old and broken to run, had been arrested and taken to Helena to stand trial. The story had spread quickly. Newspapers across the territory carried accounts of the Confederate captain who'd stolen gold and murdered a U.S. marshal, who'd lived as a respected rancher while his victim lay in an unmarked grave. Public opinion had shifted like a sudden wind. The people of Bitter Creek, who'd lived under Brennan's shadow for so long, found their voices. Witnesses came forward. Men who'd worked for Brennan in the early days testified about suspicious conversations, about the wealth that had appeared from nowhere, about warnings to keep silent. Even Cole Brennan, the loyal foreman, had given testimony, his conscience finally overcoming his fear. The trial would take months, but the outcome was certain. Brennan had confessed to Kern's murder in front of witnesses. The physical evidence, combined with Catherine's diary and Thomas's investigation notes, was overwhelming. Justice, delayed 13 years, was finally coming. Thomas Kern's body had been exhumed from the unmarked grave beneath the spruce tree. He'd been reburied with full honors in Helena, in a ceremony attended by federal marshals and territorial officials. A proper headstone now marked his resting place. Thomas Kern, U.S. Marshal, 1834 to 1865. He died in the service of justice. Catherine's grave had been found in Helena, in the small cemetery near St. Joseph's. Samuel had arranged for a new stone there as well. Catherine Ann Kern, 1840-1876. Beloved wife of Thomas Kern, devoted mother, a keeper of truth. Samuel stepped back from the door and surveyed his work with satisfaction. It's finished, he said. The cabin is finished, Silas nodded. feeling a sense of completion he hadn't expected. "Your parents would be proud." "I hope so." Samuel walked to where two items now hung on the wall beside the fireplace. Thomas Kern's badge, cleaned and polished, gleaming in its rightful place of honor, and below it the photograph of Thomas and Catherine on their wedding day, preserved in a new frame. This is their legacy, not just the cabin, but the truth. The knowledge that they fought for what was right, and that their fight wasn't in vain. Over the past weeks, Silas and Samuel had grown close. The young man had a quick mind and a good heart, qualities that reminded Silas of what Thomas Kern must have been like. They'd worked side by side rebuilding the cabin, and in the process had become something like family. "What will you do now?" Silas asked. "Stay here or go back to the Rocking H." Samuel was quiet for a moment, looking around the clearing. "Henry Sutton offered me a partnership in his ranch. Said I'd earned it with my work over the years. It's a generous offer, more than I deserve. But this is my father's land. This is where my mother waited for him, where she survived, where she kept me safe by staying silent. I think I need to be here, at least for a while. To honor them both." "It's isolated," Silas warned. "Winters are hard." "You'd be alone," Samuel smiled. "I've been alone most of my life, but I was thinking maybe I wouldn't have to be. The cabin's big enough for two if one of them was a stubborn old scout who didn't have anywhere better to be." Silas felt something warm bloom in his chest. He'd been wondering what came next for him, where he'd go when this was finished. He'd set out to winter alone, to grieve in solitude. But somewhere along the way, in pursuing justice for strangers, he'd found purpose again. He'd found something worth caring about. "I might know someone like that," Silas said gruffly. "Comes with a mule, though, non-negotiable." "Moses is welcome," Samuel said, grinning. "We'll need him for hauling supplies." They shook hands, sealing the agreement. It wasn't the ending Silas had imagined when he'd first found the burned cabin. But it was a good ending, the right ending. Two men who'd both lost family, finding a new kind of family in each other. A legacy preserved and honored. Justice served, even if it came late. That evening, they sat on the porch of the completed cabin as the sun set over the Bitterroot Range. The mountains were turning purple in the fading light, and the first stars were appearing overhead. Moses grazed peacefully nearby, content in the way only a well-fed mule can be. "I've been thinking," Samuel said, "about what my mother wrote in her diary. About wanting me to make this place one of peace, not sorrow." "It can be both," Silas said. "Peace earned through facing sorrow, through not running from hard truths. I think you're right." Samuel pulled out his father's pocket watch, the one Catherine had kept all those years. He wound it carefully, and it began to tick, steady and sure. "This watch stopped when my father died. Now it's running again. That seems fitting somehow." "It does," Silas agreed. "Your father's work is finished. His name is cleared. His son knows the truth. The watch can keep time again." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the cabin windows glowed warm with lamplight. It was a peaceful scene, this remote mountain clearing with its new cabin standing where an old one had burned. But the peace had been earned, paid for with courage and truth, and the willingness to see justice done, even after 13 years. Somewhere, Silas thought, Thomas and Catherine Kern were at peace too. Their story had been told. Their son knew who they were. The fire that was meant to bury the truth had instead preserved it, hidden but not destroyed, waiting for the right person to find it. And he had. A lonely mountain man looking for shelter had found something far more important. He'd found a purpose, a family, and the satisfaction of seeing wrongs made right. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be honored. The dead couldn't be brought back, but their memories could be preserved. And justice, even delayed, was still justice. As the night settled over the Bitterroot Range, Silas Gentry felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the quiet warmth of contentment. He'd set out to find a place to winter alone. Instead, he'd found a home. And sometimes that's exactly what a man needs.